let's talk about multiple revenue streams, because right now you do the pit,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to talk about the history of the pit kind of in like the next section of this. But you do the pit, you still play in bands,
Yeah.
and you get some revenue from royalties and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And then you also do band management. Is that correct?
Yes.
And those are the only three things you do.
I also, I mean, the studio has like shirts and things, and then I have like a studio branded pedal coming out soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's then let's say like a last thing would be like kind of like merchandise, include the pedal being included within
Yeah.
that. All right. So there's four distinct things. Um, when did you realize that you had? Well, first of all, what's the importance of having like multiple revenue streams when you are a creative and you're just living off of what you do, like artistically?
I mean, one thing, especially when you're starting, isn't gonna cut it. Like, and I honestly think it would have been easier if I lived anywhere else.
Mhm.
But this is the highest overhead of almost any state. I
Mhm.
think. Well, San Francisco probably has it worse, and New York City is just as bad.
Mhm.
But so just to survive, I had to make sure that I had a kind of absurd amount of money. If I lived in the middle of the country, this would have been so much easier.
Right.
But I might not have had as much business.
Okay. And you also wouldn't have been like a destination. Who doesn't want to go to California
Exactly.
to record a record?
Yeah.
Okay, but interesting thing though, man. Like if you think about it this way, it's like the quote unquote day job, right? It's like,
Mhm.
hey, I love what I do at night or on the weekends or whatever. That's what I really do. But then I have a day job, so that would almost be like a traditional like revenue stream. Like
Of course.
you do something until you get good enough at that other thing, but like most people don't really get the chance to stop to like give up their day job.
Right.
You got to a place, it seems relatively quickly, where you were able to make music more of a thing for you, and not just playing music but anything under that banner of
Sure.
the music industry. Did someone tell you about revenue streams, or did you figure it out on your own just kind of naturally?
No, it just kind of happened. I think that, and the studio and being in bands came hand in hand because I just wanted to be able to have control of the music I was writing.
Yeah.
But like Twitching Tongues would make sure that we made enough money, and then from tour one, Nails made money. So it was like, it just, I also think I got lucky with the first few bands I recorded just immediately exploding.
Yeah.
And that led to more work. So it was definitely an accidental snowball effect that all three kind of worked together. Whereas people came to me because I did the Twitching Tongues records, or and then in turn it got me, rotting out in Soul Search and all this stuff that immediately was huge in California. So then bands listen to those bands and want to come to me.
Yeah. Let's talk about compromise though for a sec.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, I want to tuck into that in a second. So you play predominantly in like pretty brutal bands. You play in a band that's not like a like kind of heavyish band.
I mean, I guess Twitching Tongues was the lightest one.
Right. So something that had stood out to me about Twitching Tongues is like the liberal politics. And again, not that you were like a political band, but like humanistic politics about
We
a
weren't
band.
but we weren't necessarily.
Right,
Yeah.
right. You weren't like, if I say a political band, I'm thinking of like kind of Ebullition Records,
Sure.
like, people really clearly stating their politics and taking like really that becoming almost more important than the music.
Yeah.
Where Twitching Tongues, I don't know everyone in the band, but I know you and your brother, very liberal people.
Yeah.
Not afraid to say what you think. That record, at least, was very standout for me about how you positioned it. But you've also played in like brutal bands that have a lot of like insane topics about like super, super dark things.
Yeah.
And you also played in bands with like all sorts of different people, like a diversity of people. Some of them who I'd say some of them who have different paths in life than you and I have had.
Yeah.
How do you make it work being like a very like liberal minded kind of humanistic guy and then playing with such a diversity of people? Like, because it's not just playing the bands, it's also when you record bands, I imagine like you'd probably deal with some pretty extreme personalities.
Yeah. I would say, sometimes you end up being around someone whose energy you enjoy creatively more than personally.
Yeah.
and then that happens in the studio all the time, where it's, somebody I maybe not gonna hang out with, but they can make fucking music,
Right.
and that's cool. Um, I wouldn't sit and record a white power band, but there are some times where people just differ,
Right.
and so you kind of just have to understand that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you brought up something that is, I think, super important. Again, for the audience that might know you reputationally or never have heard of you before, aren't music fans necessarily, but are interested in the business side of it. I'm going to speak as someone who knows you. Like, I know you would never, I don't believe you would ever play with or record a band that you were like, oh no, that's like bad and I won't do
Yeah.
that. Absolutely not. You brought up an interesting thing though, man. Like the idea of, to really be an effective business person, you have to have like an open mind that people can be different with an accepted parameter of difference,
Yeah.
and be willing to be uncomfortable with that.
Right.
Um, was that a thing you learned or a thing that you did?
Um, it's just a thing I did, and I think it comes from, maybe, as you said before we started, that maybe I'm unflappable, where it's like not like afraid to hurt anyone's feelings, or be around somebody that maybe I don't get along with. So it's just kind of like, well, if it gets weird, it gets weird.
Mm.
And I don't think it ever has.
Mm.
But I do a bit of vetting
Mm.
before,
Mm.
so I know I'm not gonna have the worst time. I guess the only time I've had a bad time is when I get somebody that's a lot less pro
Mm.
than I anticipated.